Hi everyone, welcome to our first monthly meeting for 2021. Happy New Year. I know there are 3 more days left that we can still say in Jan that Happy New Year. So welcome once again. Before we start and before I introduce our speaker today, just quickly wanted to take you through a few announcements. As you know that you can become a member of the National HRD Network, and we have some good news. We have a 20% discount on the membership fee right now, and you can go onto our website and find out the details and become a member. Plus, Mitch, can we go to the next slide? Also would like to let you know that we had done a design thinking workshop, a certification workshop with Dr. Pawan Soni sometime back in last year, and we had a tremendous response for that, and a lot of people reached out to us and also wanted to do the same, wanted us to do another one of the same. So this is scheduled for Feb. Again, the details are available on our website. Please do go check them out and register for the workshop. So I would now like to introduce Pete Jenkins, who is our speaker for today, and he's going to talk about gamification and HR. Pete is an international authority on gamification. He's the CEO of Gamification Plus Limited. He's also a lecturer in the University of Brighton. He's been teaching for many years. He does workshops on gamification all over. And in fact, he was just telling me that he's been to India and Sri Lanka quite a number of times in the past many years. He's also the chair of Gamification Europe, which is the annual conference for gamification practitioners. Over to you, Pete. Would love to hear from you about your the passion that you have for this topic and how all of us in HR can benefit from your experience and your thoughts.
Super. Thank you so much for having me as well. Can you see my screen? Just want to check.
Not yet.
Yes, now it's good. It took a moment to come up. That's all. Thanks for the great introduction, and thanks for the invite to come and speak to you all. I'm really pleased to be back in spirit in Bangalore. It's been a couple of years since I did a workshop there on gamification. And like you were saying, I think I've been to Mumbai to deliver workshops a couple of times, and Delhi and Sri Lanka. So, and my experience was, by the way, that about 50% of the people who attended the workshops had done or been involved in a gamification project already, and the other 50% had never heard of it. So it's quite a mixed environment in India, which is fun. So just a little bit more about me. Gamification Plus, my company, we are a consultancy, really. I advise and mentor companies on how to use gamification strategically and to do it well. And as part of that, I like delivering talks like this. We've been doing it quite well. So we won an export award in February 2019 from the Department for International Trade in the UK for spreading the word about gamification, really, around the world. And I used to chair GAMFED, the International Gamification Confederation, which is the main industry body. And our mission there is to spread best practices in gamification. So I'm an honorary ambassador for that now, because being chair was quite time consuming. And I teach gamification at the University of Brighton, as mentioned, also actually at King's College London and ESCP Europe, King's College London, specifically on gamification for HR, and at ESCP Europe on creativity and on marketing, because there are different ways you can use gamification. Okay. And I run the main gamification conference and awards. And the beauty of that is I get to see and hear all the latest and greatest examples of gamification in use, and then hopefully borrow and be inspired from some of those and spread the word to you. And on the side of my screen, I've put the game Homescapes, which actually one of my attendees at a workshop once put me onto. It's a bit like Candy Crush, if anyone's played that. It's not my favorite game, but apparently I play it quite a lot in lockdown, and I've played over 2,000 levels, which I think is probably too much, and I should have been doing some work. So I've got loads of clients around the world that we've done quite a wide range of work for, from American Express in Europe, where we were looking at building safe places to fail through games so that people could be more innovative, through to all sorts of other employee engagement type projects and some sustainability stuff, such as with our local water company, Southern Water, where we've worked on a couple of projects around getting people to use less water through gamification techniques. It's been a lot of fun. Today, in my brief time with you, I would like to take you through some examples of why we're using gamification in HR. Why is it making such a difference? I'm going to spend a little bit of time on telling you what on earth is gamification and why it's important. Then, because I don't have time to look at every aspect of how we could use gamification in HR, I'm going to dive into the recruitment side of things particularly. So pre-recruitment, employer branding, look at some examples in games around skills and psychometric testing, and then onboarding and induction programs, because that's where most employee journeys start. And I'm going to give you a tool, one of our key tools for designing good gamification, which is around player journeys, so that you can actually get started if you want to. And the plan is to have some time for Q&A, but I do sometimes get carried away with my content. So we'll see about that. Okay. So generally speaking, the examples we see of gamification in use in HR go around from attracting talent to bringing them on board to all of these things we're talking about using game mechanics to make them more effective. So the learning and developing side has been really big in the last year since COVID, how to make e-learning more effective through gamification, making the job more engaging. Quite often that's around productivity improvements as well. There's quite a few projects around retention of staff, and that often leads to focusing on their health and wellness. There's loads of gamification out there, particularly from the US, where if you do that well, you can save a lot of money in private medical insurance. And then you get some more interesting stuff for the long term, like innovation challenges and campaigns and actual culture change. And then all of that, obviously done well, makes it easier to attract staff again. So I feel like it's a virtuous circle of what we can do throughout the life cycle of the employee journey, really. And that's the aim. And it's quite holistic, gamification in HR. If you start someone off with a good game in the pre-recruitment stage, they're kind of going to want and expect to experience gamification in every other aspect of their job roles too. So you kind of need to deliver. So this would be really useful for me, is to find out, if you could put it in a chat, more about what games you play. So if you could stick in the chat what your favorite game is, and perhaps what your most recently played game is, because I've noticed that's a bit different under lockdown, COVID, quarantine, etc. My sort of favorite games are Civilization. Anything where I get to take over the world is good for me, and puzzle games like Candy Crush or Homescapes, which are quite good from a feeling of productivity, but also only spending a few minutes at a time doing it. So I'm really interested to know what games. So what do we got? Candy Crush, Ludo, Uno, yeah. I know some of you play more games than that. I'm going to wait for... There's always a few people who play FIFA or a cricket game in India. Also good. Feel free to add them as I go along. So let's put things in perspective. One of the things we do in gamification is we learn from what's done well in games, and particularly in the video games market. One of the reasons for that is because so much data is tracked in video games that we're able to work out which game mechanics are the most effective. But here we can see the trend with video gaming is really quite high and growing and keeping going and going. And in fact, this does not yet show the boost that has come from lockdown and COVID. But if you saw Microsoft's figures for Xbox yesterday. It's growing even faster. Okay, so that's the backdrop. Video games are really successful. There's something about them that is so engaging. What is that? What can we do? How can we steal that and use it in other situations? That's our game in gamification. I put it in perspective. If we take one video game company, Activision Blizzard, then and look at just players of their games for 3 months at the end of 2017, which is the last quarter that they've released data for, we have a little guess at how many hours just players of their games played. And to be fair, they do own Candy Crush, so it's going to be a big number. And there's, 8 billion people in the world. There's something like 2.5 to 3 billion gamers, if we include people playing games on mobile phones, although the number's always going up. And the answer is the biggest number there, 29 billion hours. Two things about that. One is that basically means everyone playing one of their games was playing for an average about 100 hours a month. That's a part-time job, I reckon. And the other thing is, I got the same figures for the previous year, and it was just 10 billion hours. So this trend of how much time we're spending playing games is massively increasing all the time. And it's not just the young. The fastest growing demographic, particularly in the developed world, is the over 60s. People are retiring and playing more video games. In fact, we're finally getting to the point where there were people playing video games in the 70s and 80s who are now retiring and really ready to get back on with playing games again. Sometimes they're just playing games to stay in touch with their grandkids, things like that. Sometimes it's for keeping the brain active, and sometimes it's just because they enjoy it a lot. So that's interesting. We'll add another fact to it, which is around the percentage split in engagement between male and females. This is not the same in every country, but it trends in the same direction as people get access to phones and computers. So even back in 2014, 52% of the UK video game players were female. And then, depending on who takes the stats, ever since then, it has strode between 48 and 52% every year since. And what we can see in the trends in every country in the world is it's heading towards parity. As mobile phones, for instance, have democratized access to games. Yeah. So where traditionally you might have seen a gamer as male playing a game, sitting down and playing a game for 2 or 3 hours, now it's split across different sexes, different types, but a gamer might pick up a game and play for 5 to 10 minutes, but they might do that 10, 15, 20 times a day and still play for about the same amount of time as the session gamer. So overall, what that means is if we choose the right game mechanics, we can make something really engaging for any sex and any age of person. Okay, so it is completely applicable to all people. In fact, when we're children and we're learning, we learn through play. So everyone's got it built in. And what happens is when we go into the world of work, the play side of things can get suppressed, but we can re-trigger it through good games. So a good gamification design will get even people who used to play games but don't think of themselves as a gamer anymore playing games. So that's the backdrop to this. What is gamification? Because I've been using the word a lot. This is my favorite definition from way back, that it's the process of making activities more game-like. And that's because it's kind of an instruction. It's what we're supposed to do. That's what gamification is. The commonly accepted definition is that it's the use of game design elements in non-game contexts, which is nice and academic, but doesn't really say what you need to do. So that's what I like. And it doesn't have to be big and complicated either. I've spotted this on Twitter. It's just a nice bit of visual feedback when you click the like button. Yeah, a little bit of fireworks. Boom. Which is just great. Yeah. So you can have a massive project or something really small. We just look for a little bit of inspiration from games to make something more engaging and more effective. Okay. If you wanted another way to look at it, there are good theories of psychological motivation out there. And gamification gives us a really practical framework for actually applying those theories to the day-to-day world. And that's one of the reasons it's so powerful, is very quickly you can take something very theoretical about motivation and turn it into something that actually works. And what on earth is it for? Well, the simplest way I've come up with of thinking about it is about motivation and engagement. And where we use gamification, we're either trying to create more of a behavior, like be more productive, buy more of our products, or less of the behavior, like don't do a poor physical movement in your work, lift properly, or use less water, things like that. So generally speaking, if we're after more or less of a particular behavior, gamification is likely to be a good answer. Okay. And some impressive gamification stats, but basically it's a big industry and it's growing very fast. It's settled into being part and parcel of most new software products. It's part and parcel of e-learning programs. It has become an embedded factor in a lot of other things, anything that impacts on people. I do want to flag up one interesting sort of conundrum along the way, and that is games always make things harder. Okay, so for instance, here we've got running made harder by putting hurdles there. And generally speaking, every single game we've got is about people volunteering to take on a more difficult task. Okay. What this means is in the world of work, if we gamify something, we're probably going to be asking people to do an extra step or an extra series of steps to get their normal job done, which might seem a little bit irrational. Yeah, we're all about efficiency and getting things done. So what's a practical example? I quite like this, by the way. User experience design is about removing problems from the user, and game design is about giving problems to the user. So a practical example on my own website is traditionally you'd want to, if you want people to read a piece of content, you might make it really obvious, really bold, point some arrows at it, say, read this. In the game world, we'll hide it. It will hide bits and pieces around the website. Or on my site, I've got a bit of content I really want you all to engage with, but you have to play 7 levels of a video game successfully first before you get access to it. Why would we do that? Because obviously we're going to get less eyes on that bit of content, but the people who've done that, found it, overcome the obstacles, will value that content more, and they're more likely to do the thing we want them to do with it, i.e. we're more likely to get the behavior we want by making it harder and making people value it. Okay, so you have to keep this in mind when you're trying to convince someone high up to sign off on a budget for something, because they're going to be saying, well, why are we making things harder for our customer, user, employee? And the answer is, if they're not finishing a task already, then gamification might just be the answer to get them to complete the whole task. Okay? So I want to take you very quickly through the neuroscience behind this. There are hundreds of different neurotransmitters that reward us through chemical reactions in the brain, but I'm only going to look at 4. The first one is dopamine. This is the one we talk about most of all in gamification because it's the only one that rewards us before we do something. So if we can trigger dopamine, we've got the most chance of getting someone to take an action, to make a behavior change. Okay. And dopamine can be triggered in a couple of ways. One is by offering new and novel experiences. So surprising people, giving them something new to learn, something new to taste, a new place to go, a new view. Yeah, surprise and novelty. But the one that's really useful for us in gamification is dopamine is released in goal setting. So when we set goals for ourselves, dopamine is released in anticipation of us achieving that goal. And what do we do in games? We set you missions. We set you quests. These are goals. So gamification there is about getting people to sign up to quests and missions and getting a bit of dopamine release in anticipation of doing that. And often we'll give them a bit of feedback along the way of their progress towards the goal to trigger a bit more dopamine. And sometimes you can just state it or write it down and it will become effective. So for instance, I'm going to use gamification in this session to inspire you all to think about where you can use gamification. What I'd like you to do is have a think and put something in the chat about starting with, I'm going to use gamification too. And you'll get a bit of dopamine release in anticipation of doing it. and it will make it slightly more likely that you actually do it. So I'm going to give you a second to do that, and I'm going to talk about the next slide as well. But I'm going to use gamification to put it in the chat. The second of the 4, oxytocin. This one's great. This one makes us feel good when we're in social situations and working with others, in teams, that sort of thing. And it basically accentuates everything we feel while we're taking part in something with other people. So it's a good power up, really, for anything else we do. It's more motivating when we're doing things with other people. In fact, this can even occur remotely. So the latest research shows that we get oxytocin release when someone likes our Facebook update or retweets our tweet or likes our Instagram post. And this is quite an easy thing to build into gamification systems. Yeah, liking, upvoting, sharing, and we'll get oxytocin release. This is probably one of the key things that powers social media platforms. The other cool thing about oxytocin is that it's released when we listen to stories. So there's 2 good things about that. One, from a marketing point of view, stories are more memorable and easier to pass on. So if we hear something as a story, it's more effective. Also, basically, it means it feels like we're in the story. We're taking part. When we hear a story, the oxytocin release makes us think we're in it. So this makes it really useful in learning. If I tell you something in the form of a story and then something goes wrong for me, because I'm listening to it in a story form, it feels like it actually went wrong for me. So I'm more likely to be able to learn from that failure because it was done in story form. And what we see in video games is some of the best, biggest, strongest games have strong narratives and story elements to it for much this reason. And sometimes it does not take much to add a bit of story to a gamification project. It could be a couple of paragraphs of scene setting, and it's enough to trigger this. So storytelling is really important in this, and doing things together in groups. So if you wanted to trigger some oxytocin, I don't know if you can comment in the chat on someone else's, but if you liked one of the goals someone has put in, like employee, what do we got? Employee engagement, expediting the recruitment process, employee development, onboarding. These are all great. So I would say, yeah, these are great. I like that. And trigger a bit of oxytocin. Okay. Third one, serotonin. Simple in some respects. If you have enough of this, you're happy. If you don't have enough, you're depressed. But quite easy to trigger. First way to trigger it is by thanking people and praising them. Which is probably one of the easiest things we can ever do for someone. It just requires thinking about it and having some time. You know, there's no other costs involved. It's when we do user focus groups on what rewards would most motivate people, nearly always top of the list is praise and recognition. Stuff that costs nothing except time. So serotonin is released when we do that. Serotonin is also released when we achieve something difficult, something that required true effort. So, I don't know, the first time we ran around the block, the first time we ran a 5K, the first time we ran a half marathon or a marathon. Whenever we achieve something difficult and finish it, we get serotonin release, which rewards us. So what do we do in games? We set you difficult challenges so that when you complete them, you get serotonin release. Even better, having achieved something, if we give you a badge or a trophy or a medal to represent that achievement, every time you see that badge or trophy again in the future, whether it's virtual or physical, you'll get more serotonin release. So we can literally program ourselves to be happier if we put our trophies and awards on display. And this could be certificates as well. You know, I've got my degree certificate and I put it on the wall. I can see it. I'm going to trigger some serotonin, assuming it was difficult to get your degree. So a great thing to write here to trigger a bit of serotonin is to write, I am proud to have achieved something. So for instance, I'm proud to have learned to hula hoop. That was my challenge in the first lockdown back in March last year. It's not something I'm going to do for you right now, just in case I knock over my coffee, because I'm not great at it. But I'm proud to have achieved learning a new skill. So what I'd like you to do in the chat is write something you are proud to achieve. This could have been during COVID period, or it could be anything you're proud to have achieved recently or across your life. And we will recognize that and say, well done, that's great. So write that down and program yourself to be a bit happier. The final one of the 4 I want to look at is endorphins. These are natural opioids we produce, so they're very, very cool, very fun. And they generally happen when we're taking part in a challenge. So the more exciting the challenge, like putting a time limit on it, then the more endorphins we can release. And the easiest way to get endorphin release is to design difficult challenges. So if we combine all 4 of these neurotransmitters, what we try and do in a game or gamification design is trigger all of them. So for dopamine, I'm going to offer you a new and novel experience. I'm going to set some quests and missions in it. I'm going to put you in a team or a guild or get you to compete against other people to trigger the oxytocin bit and the fact that we're playing with other people. I'm going to design a difficult challenge that's fun to take part in to trigger the endorphins. And then I'm going to represent the end of that challenge, make it obvious that you've completed it to trigger the serotonin release, and then give you something to represent that success that you can look back on in your collection in the future. And if we've triggered those 4 things, we've done well in our game or gamification. Okay? This leads quite neatly into the psychological theories, which I don't want to spend too much time on, particularly Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs. This being a talk to HR people, I'm going to guess you've all seen this or versions of this, or the version with free Wi-Fi at the bottom, or the 8-step version. Anyway, the key bit I want you to know is gamification expects that we've got the bottom 2 layers or elements of the bottom 2 layers already in place. Yeah, people are feeling vaguely healthy, vaguely well paid, and secure in these moments. And then we can work on the gamification aspect. There are some interesting bits of research around this that maybe we only need to tick a few of the safety and physiological needs before we can move on. But the secret to this is if someone is very low paid, then they're unlikely to pay that much attention to gamification, because gamification tends to happen in the top of the triangle. It's all about self-esteem, love, belonging, self-actualization, autonomy, things like that. Okay? So, for instance, we had a supermarket chain come to us for advice on games or gamification to make their shelf stackers more productive. And the short answer was we could design a game that would be new and novel and would be interesting and would work for maybe 2 to 4 weeks. And while it was new and novel and exciting, it would overcome these bottom 2 bits. But then it would quickly fade away in terms of effectiveness. So the answer was either to create a new game every 4 weeks, say, so you have 12 games a year to just keep that novelty going, or give them a pay rise. So both were quite expensive options. The main theory that relates to everything we see in games is self-determination theory from Decky and Ryan. This states that if we can complete or trigger 3 basic needs, relatedness, so doing things with other people, autonomy, giving people choice. So if I'm employing a millennial or younger, I would like to give them autonomy or choice over when they work, where they work, and even how they work at their job to make them as highly motivated as possible. And competence. And if we trigger these 3 things, they'll be highly motivated. Competence, by the way, is a bit more fear-based. It says, I'm only going to have a go at something if I think I've got a chance of succeeding at it. Yeah, so if I don't think I've got a chance, I'm not even going to try. So competence is a really interesting one to try and overcome. But then came along Daniel Pink, who wrote Drive. Highly recommend you read this book if you have not. He studied motivation and engagement amongst employees at companies, and he has 3 key drivers. Some are the same, some not. So he still has autonomy and choice as a key motivator. Instead of competence, he has mastery. And this seems to be a bit more like what we see in games, to be fair. He realized that we just like to get better at stuff. So if we can get someone started on a journey where they can get better at a skill, they'll be really motivated. And I think this is what we see more in games. And this is what we can design for. And then he added a new one, purpose, which is around everything we do for a greater purpose is more motivating, even if the individual activity is less motivating. So it could be a personal purpose, like losing weight, quitting smoking, things like that. or it could be a wider one, like eradicating poverty, disease, saving the environment, stuff like that. Anything we do towards that greater purpose is going to be more motivating. And there's a great example of this at freerice.com. I like this example because it's a quiz game that has two major purposes. One is to give the whole world a free education, and the other is to feed all the hungry people. And they've combined this game into to do those two things. And basically, you go on to freerice.com, you start playing a quiz where you're learning about a subject. It defaults normally to playing and learning a language, but there are other subjects like capitals of the world, all sorts of things. And every time you get an answer right, 10 grains of rice are donated to the UN World Food Programme. Now, 10 grains of rice doesn't sound that much, but between us, if we all played and answered 10 questions right, we'd probably feed quite a few families right now. In fact, over 10 million grains of rice have been donated through this website to help feed many hundreds of thousands of families. That's a great example of purpose-driven gamification, learning and feeding the needy. So next time you're ever distracted at work and you're thinking about playing, I don't know, Minesweeper or Solitaire on the computer, think about playing a serious game like freerice.com first. In fact, now that I mention Solitaire and Minesweeper, it's a good time to mention that those were early examples of gamification in that they were games designed to help everyone learn how to use a mouse, how to left-click, right-click, and drag and drop. They did some tests and they found workshops and training people in how to use the mouse weren't very effective, but the games were. I think the only issue is the side effect, which is how many millions or billions of hours of productivity may have been lost over the years through people continuing to play said games. So this is what Free Rice looks like when you're playing it. Click some answers, get them right. Donate some food. So if we want to stick all of these theories together as supported by the neuroscience, then we have Andrzej Marzuski's 3 layers of motivation. In this, we've got the base layer. We're assuming that's in place. These are strangely familiar to the bottom 2 layers of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So we've got this in place. 90% of our work in gamification is actually focused on the emotional or intrinsic layer. And this is a combination here of self-determination theory and Dan Pink's drive into what we call in gamification RAMP, or relatedness, autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And this is about getting people, if I spend all my time working on a project, 90% of it is on this level, working out how to make sure we've got these 4 things being activated in our gamification project. And the trivial or extrinsic layer, what people often think is gamification, the points, the badges, the leaderboards, is sort of surface extrinsic stuff, but we only use it where we're trying to trigger something in the emotional layer. So in relatedness, we might put people in a guild, a team. For autonomy, we might give them worlds to explore, or different tactical choices they can make. For mastery, we'll give them boss fights and levels to go up to show how they're progressing. And for purpose, we might give them some epic fictional purpose like defeating the zombie hordes, or something more serious if we've got something relevant to the business. And if we've got all 4 of those ticked, we've got someone who's really engaged and motivated. And if you take one thing away from my talk, it's that it's all about this emotional layer. And if we tick all 4 of these, we've got the most chance of motivating the most people. And if we only use one thing, like, I don't know, say leaderboards, it might work, but only on, say, 10 to 15% of your target audience. And that's probably not enough for the long term, although it will look good in your figures for the first few weeks. Okay, so RAMP, relatedness, autonomy, mastery, and purpose. That's the thing to remember. And if we get really carried away, advanced gamification and game design, we'll look at flow. This is the theory from Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who studied, to begin with, mountain climbers. He noticed that they would spend hours climbing mountains in a state of utter absorption in their task, because if they didn't, they would fall off and potentially die. But there was something very enjoyable about that state they were in, so that when they got to the top of a mountain, probably one of the first things they're thinking after they recovered is, which mountain am I going to climb next? Because they want to get back into this state of flow. After studying mountain climbers, he studied serious sports people, then creative artists, and then people in the world of work. And we all get into flow at certain points in our day-to-day jobs or our lives. And it's a state of being that we really like. And games are really good at getting us into a state of flow. And it's one of the harder things to build into gamification. I'll explain a bit more. So flow can basically be encouraged by looking at the level of difficulty of a task. So here we've got a low to high level of difficulty of a task, and then comparing that against your skill to that task. So if I've got a highly difficult task and I've got no real skill in it, I'm going to be highly anxious. So you often spot people like this in the world of work, where they've been given a job to do that they don't really know how to do. But if I'm too skilled at a job and it's a bit too simple, I might be bored, potentially relaxed. Sometimes we need to just chill out and do a task that's quite easy for a bit. But best of all is where we've got a task that is quite difficult, that stretches us and stretches our skill level. And at that point, we're in a state of flow. And that's what we're trying to achieve. Games do this by making level after level more difficult. And that's the thing that often gets missed in a gamification program. It gets designed as a sort of one-size-fits-all process, and nobody's really thought about what happens when someone completes that bit and gets better at it. And the best reward for someone who completes a challenge is to give them another challenge that's slightly harder. And it takes a little bit more design, but it's so worth it. Cool. I'm on track. Oh, hang on. Who's giving me a question? How can we use gamification to increase participation in activities? I talked about Maslow's theory, and I want to understand if there are any other factors which can lead to participation. The main thing is thinking about doing all of them together. So the relatedness, the autonomy, the mastery and purpose, and how you represent that to people and how you bring them along. And one of the top ways to glue all that together is through story and narrative so that it feels cohesive. In fact, I'm going to show you some examples because I think that'll help you see how it's been done. So in terms of the gamification examples, I was going to dive into from an HR perspective. I'm just going to look at pre-recruitment, recruitment, and onboarding. And I'm going to show you 2 or 3 examples of each that people are already doing. So first of all, employer branding. There are some really interesting examples and some quite simple ones out there. Domino's Pizza Hero was a great one. It was an app and a website. First and foremost, it was designed for customers to customize and choose their own pizzas. But there were games in there about creating better pizzas and sharing those and other people enjoying them. And if your pizza designs were really popular, then you would get a job offer pop up or a chance to actually go and work in your local Domino's. And they used this as a recruitment game and got around 800 people jobs. So a fun game from a marketing purpose, but also useful from a recruitment purpose. And I will make the slides available because they've got some links in, like this one to the case study. So you can look at that in when you've got time later. It could be something like the challenge Maersk had a while back. Maersk are famous for logistics and sending shipping containers around the world. But for a while, they were also the 4th largest offshore oil drilling company. But nobody seemed to know that, and they really struggled to recruit. So they created a game called Quest for Oil. Let's have a little, I think I can show you what that looks like. And in this game, which was really designed just for an employer branding perspective, people got to see what it was like to work at Maersk, the sort of tasks they'd be given, and it showed them a bit of a career track. So you would start from analyzing seismic maps to running an offshore oil rig to running a distribution in the region and building it up from there. And the first version was individual player, and then version 2 was multiplayer. So you could play with other people, which added that relatedness aspect to make it more successful. And Quest for Oil, it gave them a couple of wins immediately. First off, there aren't many employer branding games out there, so they got quite a lot of PR coverage for this, which helps in the recruitment process anyway. It was pre-training people in their terminology and what it might be like to work there. So people who applied as a result of it were a better fit for the company. And there's a positive side effect. Although it wasn't designed for existing employees, the people who were there enjoyed playing it, and their internal Facebook group was a buzz with people's results from this. In fact, one of my students a couple of years ago had worked at Maersk while this game was being released, and it was one of their fond memories of playing that with their colleagues and against their colleagues. So quite often a good gamification project has an unexpected bonus as well. And of course, these things spread. So once one oil company had done it, others do. Shell have multiple games around this. There is the Shell Explorer game. This one's about raising your skill and working out where are good places to drill. It's quite a simple game, but quite good fun, and it's about spreading the word. And I've shared a link to the trailer because you can't actually play this game at the moment. Sometimes they take these down while they have another game going live. But this is the sort of thing we see. So before we've even recruited anyone, we can have a positive impact on their impression of our business. Yeah. And some of these games are also designed to be played at jobs fairs, jobs expos. So you'd have a crowd around your stand playing the games and just making you stand out from your competitors. This is a good way to stand out, particularly with your recruiting younger generations. The second bit, now we've got too many people applying for our jobs. So how do we find the best ones? And there are a growing number of gamified examples for skills testing and psychometric testing. And I'm going to talk you through three. This is probably the biggest one in the UK, Arctic Shores. They won a gamification award a couple of years ago for their projects. And I think they've had over 1 million candidates go through their system. But you basically play games, and the way you play the games assesses you and gives the employer results about their skills. And the great thing about gamified psychometric testing is it's difficult to game the system. When I was young and applying for jobs and there were psychometric tests, I would nearly always think, what's the role I'm applying for? Okay, what sort of answers are they looking for in this game, in this psychometric test? And not give you true results. Whereas in a game, all you know is you've got to try and win the game. And how you go about that is what they're judging you on. And so you get a much more accurate picture of people and their behaviors. And also, there are so many data points being created while they play the game. You have a lot of information to base that on. Yeah, one game I looked at, in 7 minutes, they created something like 27,000 data points about a potential candidate, which gives them a really accurate way of benchmarking them against others. So that's Arctic Shores. This is an interesting one, Owiwi, because it's a different type of game. It's a branching choices or adventure game. And basically, this one tests your decisions in scenarios. So the way it gives you a bit of story, tells you what is happening and gives you some choices. And the type of choices you make will then lead to them knowing your psychometric profile. This is a really fun way to play and be engaged. It also seems to have about the most academic research backing up the accuracy of it. Owiwi is founded out of Greece originally, but is spreading around the world now. So I recommend you try that one and have a go. And then there are skills games and benchmarking. This one is from Benchmark Games, which is Hungary, the UK, and the US. And I like this one a lot. I've used it to recruit my own interns. And also I used it recently in a student cohort to form the groups that they were in, to make high-performing teams. So basically, they would play the Curiosity game, and it would look for strengths and gaps. And then based on the results, we could form people into teams of 4 or 5 people, where between them, they can cover all the different skill sets needed for a high-performing team. The particularly interesting thing about benchmark games now is they're less about psychometric testing and more about benchmarking. So if you've got 100 of your best staff, they get you to play those 100 staff members to play the game. Now we've got a benchmark of what a good member of staff looks like. Then any candidates play, and we see who has a good fit, is a similar type. In fact, if they're really good, you'll get your 100 worst staff to play as well, although you won't tell them that's what you're doing. So you can know who exactly to avoid as well. And companies like Coca-Cola have been using this to recruit customer service agents in Eastern Europe while keeping the old-fashioned recruitment methods alive as well, i.e. interviewing and recruiters making their own decisions. And because they've been using it for a few years, they're now able to show that the people recruited through the game have been higher performers and more productive and better fits than the ones recruited through the normal recruitment methodology. So we're seeing really different effects from all this. And all of these, by the way, help increase inclusivity and diversity, because they are giving you results not based on age or sex. They're giving you results based on skill, experience, and behaviors. So I like these a lot. So those are the psychometric and testing skills. There are other, by the way, there are plenty of other platforms out there. Those are just 3 I know quite well. Now we've chosen the right member of staff, let's have a look at onboarding and induction. This is, by the way, probably the cheapest and easiest place to experiment with gamification. Quite often you've got an L&D or an HR person in charge of the onboarding process. They've got a lot of autonomy about how it's done. So it's normally quite easy to put some changes in from a gamification perspective. But it's being done by very large companies. PwC have done all sorts of onboarding games. This is one of their latest ones. It's basically a trivia quiz game. It's quite pretty and done in their branding. And there's a great case study showing that actually it's more effective and it's working particularly well with virtual onboarding. They were quite lucky in that they had this ready to go when COVID happened and everyone started working from home, and they still wanted to recruit new people. In fact, where it's designed well, we're starting to see results where virtual onboarding processes are being more effective than the ones where people turned up to the office, because actually they have to make sure it works and that there aren't gaps in the process. So there's some really interesting things happening right now in the world in all these games. So that's PwC. If you don't want to design your own, there are some great platforms out there. This one is Gamification, which is out of Singapore. They've got a bunch of templates, which are really quite cheap in my experience, where you can download a pre-onboarding or onboarding template, upload your own imagery and logos and just change a few wording, and you could be live in a few days. So you can start experimenting really cheap on this side of things. So have a look at that. And this company I've chosen, they're out of Malaysia and Singapore, self-driven. They do all sorts of things from a gamification point of view, from health and wellness and more, but they also do onboarding as part of it. And there's a couple of key factors here. One is they've created and embedded it in Microsoft Teams, which from what I can see, most big corporates are now using. So it's quite easy to just go live with this. And also, I'm aware that they're active in India and they've got India branch offices. So you could probably get a free demo or a trial out of them quite easily if you want. And one of the other things I like about it is because it's from Malaysia, it's probably quite a lot cheaper than an equivalent from the UK where I am as well. So 9 great examples just from the pre-recruitment, psychometric testing and onboarding section. And I could go on with more examples in every other aspect of the HR and employee journey, but I don't have time, which is sad. So hang on, too fast. So I want to give you a tool to get started, and that is player journeys. If anyone's been in marketing, then you're used to marketing personas and the journeys you take them on. But in game design, we use player journeys a lot as well. This is a 4-stage process. And what we found is if people miss any one of these stages, then the game or gamification project doesn't work. It will fade. Something about it won't work well. And the game itself is generally in the scaffolding or habit building phase. So that's where we've built our gamification. But there are 3 other phases. So they are discovery. This is about getting people excited about your game in the first place, to download the app or to put in their details, to get started, to sign up to it and be excited about it. Onboarding is about making them comfortable that they're going to be able to do it and be able to play the game. So we're talking user guides here, but also exciting them about the gameplay and making them excited about that. Then you've got the gameplay. And then the final stage, the mastery stage, is what do you do with someone who's actually successful? Do you just let the game end? That doesn't make anyone feel great. Do you give them more content, other levels to achieve? That's a great reward. Or if you can't afford to do that, how do you wrap it up? How do you make it obvious that they've completed and finished the game? And that's what mastery is about. So maybe that's where we might give them a badge or a trophy or some sort of reward or prize. I'm going to show you a video now because I think this little video, although it's marketing, not HR, I think it shows all 4 stages of the player journey in just 2 minutes. So you'll have 30 seconds. If you can leap and grab the jacket, you win the jacket. So, what do we see here? Discovery in this is very physical. The floor starts moving. They're quite excited, maybe even scared, but they definitely need to know and want to know what's happening next. The onboarding phase is quite literal as well. They have to hang on to the wall, the climbing wall. And you've given them basically the first element of the game, which is you're going to be climbing. This is the climbing wall. Hang on to it. The game itself is to climb up and to take the leap. So you saw even people who missed the jacket had a big smile on their face because it's a lot of fun to take that leap and jump. And that's the game, climb and jump. And mastery is represented by the fact that they got the jacket. So it wraps it up nicely. In fact, I think the people who missed probably said, can I have another go? But yeah. And in fact, those people who won the jacket will be wearing those for weeks and telling people all about them. So great for viral storytelling as well. So that's the player journey. How do you design this? So the secret is to think emotions first. We're designing a journey for humans, players. And we want to take them on an emotional journey. We don't want to think about game mechanics. We don't want to think about the product, particularly at this point. We just want to think about what emotions do we want someone to actually experience at each stage of the player journey. Okay. This example is actually from an innovation challenge for teams. We wanted them to be interested, curious, and feel empowered in the first phase. In the onboarding phase, we wanted them to feel social, i.e. understand which teams they'd be in, to understand how the process was going to work and comfortable that they could contribute. In the game itself, it was to be inspired, obviously, and to put ideas in, but also to feel involved and to help other people's ideas develop and to feel that sense of community. So these emotions were really good. And then the mastery phase was pretty easy. It was about how do we recognize people taking part, make them feel pride in the process, protective, and feel like it went really well. Okay, so this is what we do, design the emotions. And the more varied the emotions, the more interesting the game we design. And people get stuck with emotions. They tend to think of just the 6 in the middle. This might be a bit small to read, but the 6 in the middle are your basics. Love, joy, surprise, sadness, anger, and fear, which are good, but they're not enough for design work. And in fact, this whole emotions wheel doesn't include every emotion that's possible out there, but it gives you, the more specific you can get, the better you can get at game design. I tend to ask people to think of at least 3 emotions to work with at each level, each stage of the journey. And you can use any of them. I've got a client in Egypt who their project they wanted to gamify was to get people in the office to take the stairs instead of the lift. That was one of the projects they were working on. And the team chose the emotion of romance or romantic for one of the discovery phase emotions, thinking that we wouldn't be able to use that. They were just trying to challenge me, I think. But actually, it gave us a really interesting game design. We were able to build visuals and ideas around taking the stairs, improving your look and feel, improving your confidence, giving you more chance of meeting the partner of your dreams because you took part in this competition from a romantic point of view. And there were ideas around like blind dates in the lifts, in the stairs and things, which some of which weren't a good idea, but were interesting. And we came up with much more interesting game design because we had more interesting emotions. Similarly, I worked with some students. They were trying to build a game to actually make lecturers better lecturers, which is a good fun challenge. And in the mastery phase, they wanted to achieve the emotion of speechless or awestruck for a lecturer who'd done really well. And to design that, they ended up realizing they needed, when they were going to hand out the award, they wanted every single student they could get hold of that lecturer had been involved in teaching in the same space at the same time for this overwhelming feeling when they handed the award out. Yeah, and they wouldn't have designed that without thinking of the emotion first. So the trick here is 3 emotions for each phase of the journey: discovery, onboarding, scaffolding or habit building, and the mastery phase. Okay, and what this can look like if it's done well, okay, and in any organization is massive. You can end up with games all over the place making a big difference. So here you've got Mars in Spain, who've been implementing gamification projects actually probably for 5 years now since I read this article, achieving increases in sales. Here's the figure. They're now running 125 different games across different parts of the business. Some are customer focused, some are employee focused, some are health and wellness focused, but they are using it to transform their organization, and they're able to get these levels of engagement. And some of these games will be very simple and some will be big and complex. It's a real mix. But that's what success looks like. It's not 1 or 2 or 3 projects. It's a lot of small ones, or a few big ones and some small ones. There's some sort of framework for a playful culture that will make your whole business more productive and more engaged staff. And some of the outcomes of this are better staff retention, less sick days. There's just so many different ways it impacts the bottom line. So success is possible, and it could be more games than you were thinking is possible. I've got the timing about right for once. So on my website, there's a bunch of resources. For those of you who want to go deeper, we've got a reading list, which is many of the books up here on my shelf. Some around gamification, some around elements of game design, some around employee motivation. It's split up into those sections, and you can download that and go deeper. There is a few white papers. There's some on big data and gamification, one on marketing and grabbing people's attention. And there'll be more, of course, at some point. And also, because I run a conference, there's quite a few links to the best talks out there as well around different aspects. I'm not asking you to watch all of them, but just find the ones that resonate with you or the project you're working on and dig a little deeper. And finally, I mentioned there's a resource on my website that you can't access unless you play the game. Now, this resource is actually our success framework. So these are all the steps you need to take to deliver a successful gamification project. And you can play this game at gamificationplus.uk/game. Let me show you. The first level is quite easy. This, by the way, is apparently me, is designed by my team. So every time he falls down a hole and dies, a little bit of me dies. So if you could avoid doing that, that'd be great. Looks simple, doesn't it? Obviously, we've designed some flow into it, so each level is more challenging than the previous one. But the fastest time anyone's ever done all of them in is just under 2 minutes. And on average, it might take someone 10 to 15 minutes to play and win. And so at the end of that, you will get a success framework. And if you've got any questions about implementing that, obviously just let me know. In fact, I'm completely ready for taking some questions now, but also if you've got a particular project or something you want to talk about, because you've been paying attention for the hour, you can book a free 20-minute video call with me. So you can scan the QR code with an app and book a convenient time. And I look forward to speaking to a few of you about your projects. And if I'm very clever, I will look at the comments and wait for some questions to roll in from you. And I suspect someone from the team will also join me on the stage as well.
Yes, I'm back with you on the stage, Pete.
Super.
So
I'm going to stop sharing my screen as well so I can.
Yeah, so there is one question from Arti. I think you can see it on your screen.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so serotonin released with, say, healthy work relationships or in a healthy work environment. That's a good one. The first thing I was thinking was oxytocin would be the one with relationships, in case it was a test. And oxytocin is released in negative or positive environments. So, for instance, if I shake your hand for at least 7 seconds, I'm going to do it virtually right now, then oxytocin would start flowing, okay? Because physical touch will trigger it. And it will accentuate any emotion I'm feeling or you're feeling. So if you're already happy, it will make you happier. But if you are grumpy or angry, it's going to make you angrier. And so a key issue with oxytocin is actually being careful when you use it. So in certain situations, like if someone's upset and you go to comfort them and give them a hug, you could well be making it feel worse. So, okay, next question? What do we got? Where do companies go wrong when they begin gamification? First way they go wrong is they start with a game in mind instead of going through a process and designing it. It generally means they're going to use the wrong type of game for their audience. One of my first clients, the CEO really liked golf, and he had an idea. We will use golf or a golf formatted game for helping people understand their pensions benefits. And it didn't really work. In fact, I was hired in by the rest of the board to convince the CEO that his game would not fly. But the way to do it is actually to start through our process, but basically understand the business objectives, understand the type of players you have and what type of games they enjoy, and then work from that. And it nearly always will come up with a different game, but also something more relevant that they're more likely to take part in. The other thing people do wrong is they just use points, badges, and leaderboards. This happens because they're the easiest things to build. You're generally tracking some sort of activity already, so you can allocate points to it. And once you've got points, it seems like a no-brainer to have a leaderboard. But the downside for leaderboards, particularly in HR and employee engagement, is if you think about it, only one person can be at the top of a leaderboard. So how motivated are people lower down? And so there are some real tricks to when to use a leaderboard or how best to implement one. Some departments can handle it quite well, like sales teams traditionally are used to a competitive environment, so a leaderboard works well there. But if I then took it across to the customer service team, it may easily backfire because they should be more collaborative, really.
So I have a related question, Pete, before you go on to the next one, is, which kind of situations will you advise people not to use gamification?
Well, the first one is sometimes you're not getting the behavior you want because the process itself is broken or, it's not good enough. Yeah, sometimes there might be some basics to fix first. It's unfortunate when this happens. We get an inquiry, we look at the process and we go, well, you're not ready for gamification. You've got to fix these 3 things first. If you're really unlucky, there's a cultural issue. So just putting a game in wouldn't necessarily work. Yeah, so we worked with an organization where they wanted to be more innovative, But the issue was every single person felt their job was at risk if they didn't do, if they did something innovative, they felt unprotected. So they needed to change that culture really before they could do the innovation game. Although, you know, we suggested a game to help them change the culture, but it was a different objective from what they came to us with in the first place, as you might imagine.
Yeah.
Good question, though.
Thank you. So you have a question from Rupande. And thanks, Rupa, for introducing us to Pete.
Indeed.
Yes.
Yes, you must know my uncle, because my uncle's based in Bangalore. I think that's what happened there. So the question is, would repeated use of the same game affect emotion behavior of participants? Ooh, that's a great question. And the short answer is yes. There's a couple of different aspects to this. One is, I like to think of gamification as a game framework around your day-to-day job or the thing you're trying to achieve. So if I'm making someone more productive in their work through the game or creating a new behavior in their work, such as for a sales CRM type thing, I want them to do certain behaviors. I'll use a game to encourage that. If I've designed it well, then I feel like after 3 or 4 months or whatever the period might be, I could take the game away and the habits are now existing. Yeah, we've changed people's behaviors for the long term. That's a good, successful use. That should be possible. But the other side of it is, some games are a bit unique and change the results. So the psychometric testing games, if you play one a second time, you will not get an accurate result because you already have some experience of it. So for instance, I played a psychometric testing game once. I came back as innovative and various great things about overcoming obstacles in the skill set because I've been playing it that time. Then I played it again once to show my students how it worked, and I got a completely different result of not innovative. And it was because I'd already played it and I'd seen all the issues. So when I was trying to overcome obstacles, I already knew what to do. And so it looked like I was getting the wrong result. So what you've got to watch out for with some games is they will only work accurately once. It's really mostly just in the psychometric testing and skill testing type area. But there's a few others, but it's a another good question. Are there any examples of gamifying a virtual session without high-end technology? Do we mean a session like this or a remote meeting? What do we think? Which one shall I answer?
I guess both.
Okay, so a session like this, for me, it's one of the reasons I like getting people to put stuff in the chat is to take part and to think about it. And some of the examples I was doing will have had an emotional effect. So particularly if you were proud of something, that would trigger some serotonin release. Apart from that, you kind of need to think about what the outcome or behavior change you're designing for is. So if I want a more successful remote meeting, it depends what it's for. Yeah, there are people now in the US who are having meetings around the campfire in the game Red Dead Redemption 2 because it's a different scenario, it's a different setting. They don't have a meeting room that they can meet in at the moment. And generally speaking, it works quite well, except sometimes a random other player will come along and shoot someone in the meeting. And then they have to reboot and log in again. But apart from that, you could use role play in meetings, get people to play different roles and stuff. There's quite a few different ways to do a virtual session in a gamified way, as long as we know what it is we're trying to achieve. What's the behavior change we want? Do we want people to just be, do we want everyone to contribute? Then I would design a slightly different game. Yeah. There's a lot of work going on in this area at the moment, obviously, as well, around the world.
Yeah, and I guess with the entire pandemic situation, many people are actually thinking much more about the virtual settings than they were in the past. So has that had an impact on some of the queries that come to you or the discussions that you have?
Okay, yeah, definitely. So 2 main areas I've seen that we've been impacted by as a business. One is in the e-learning and gamification space. So at the start of COVID and lockdowns, a lot of companies already had e-learning platforms. So they're like, excellent, we're in the right place. We'll just turn it on and make that the main way forwards. And what we found after 3 or 4 months was our inquiries went through the roof, because what people were finding was e-learning just wasn't working on its own. Yeah, they weren't getting the behavior change. They weren't getting the skill across. The stuff that was working in live workshops and things was not working through the e-learning platforms. They've got to do something above and beyond. So what we've seen is platforms that are out there weren't engaging enough or weren't experiential enough, probably, to get the skills across. And now there's a lot of work being done in that area, which keeps me busy. And the other area is health, actually. So there's a lot of work being done which didn't need to be done, particularly. A lot of people do a lot of exercise with other people. Okay, so particularly I work with some projects around rehabilitation from illness, whether it's arthritis or heart disease, things like that. And all the successful projects had been running on group-based work. And now people can't meet. So they're having to find ways to gamify and get that level of engagement and group feel and peer support and peer pressure happening when people aren't in the room. And so there's a lot of gamification of health apps, health experiences going on to get that around that side of things. In fact, pick any area and there's probably something. But for me, one of the nice things is there were a lot of platforms that already existed that just weren't getting the take up, particularly in the gamified recruitment space, that are now doing massive projects. You know, Nestle in Europe came to us. They want to hire people with a digital mindset. Okay, so they're flexible and can work from home and do all this stuff. And so we were able to get an off-the-shelf gamified psychometric platform that they're now running 50 to 100,000 people a year through to find the ones with a flexible change mindset, i.e. digital mindset in their terminology. And they were able to go live with that in just 2 or 3 months.
Oh, wow.
Platforms already exist. I mean, obviously they did I think they've just finished the rollout and testing on internal teams just to double check it. But now it's any day now, or now it's live. So.
Wow. Yeah. There is one more question.
Are there instances where an employee disagrees to participate in gamification leaderboard implication? Absolutely. So games are only fun if you're not forced to play them. It's the short answer. So we would often design a game and aim for maybe 80% take up through volunteers as a good outcome. And if 80% of your workforce are suddenly more productive and engaged, it's a big success. But what actually happens if it's a good gamification project is word spreads, and then you might get higher take up. And there was a good project in Poland, I think, with one of the big Spanish banks, all their counter staff. So 1,400 counter staff, average age around 50, 88% of them female. This seemed like a non-good target audience for gamification. They wanted a game that basically would encourage them to hit their sales targets. So if they get to play this game every 2 days during the work for 10 minutes. If they hit their sales performance targets, they get to play for an extra 5 minutes and get some more resources to play within the game. Think a bit Sims in design. So building a village and competing against other branches. And because of the target audience, they thought maybe they'd get a take up of 60% of the workforce playing. In actual fact, they got 99, 98%. Word spread fast, and they played it every couple of days for a whole year. And now I think they're on version 3, the 3rd year of this. And they've had to keep adding stuff to it. But people were hitting their KPIs, really enjoying the game. It was limited to 10 to 15 minutes every other day. So it wasn't taking too much time away from the counter. Obviously, you don't want to take people away from the customer service desk, but they're hitting their targets and having fun doing it. And they had an end of year party about the people who were doing the best in it. And it's just, that shows that the target was 60% of them playing and they got 99. And it wasn't through forcing them to play. It was getting them to volunteer and spread the word.
Yeah.
So what was this? Is this something a learning and development professional can learn and do? Yeah, you should be a natural at it. You're already designing engaging courses. Yeah, it's all about engagement. So if yes, what courses or trainings do you suggest? Well, the short answer is obviously I run courses. And they're delivered online. We also run them through the university. So today, actually, I was doing a whole week's worth of content around just points, badges, and leaderboards before I came on this call. But the main thing is yeah, just get out there. But the best way to learn is just to try stuff out. You know, the next thing you're working on, put a game element in there. See what a difference it makes. Yeah, don't think big to begin with. Do something small and see the impact. And once you've got that, you can then use that ROI to get a bit of budget for your next go.
So, Pete, I mean, are these a lot of these games? Are they just a player to the computer, so to speak, or are there also competitive games that people design in multiplayers? And if so, what is the largest number of players that someone has kind of designed a game in an organization for?
Gosh, that's an interesting one. They scale quite big. So this next example is a customer loyalty scheme, but there's a fashion brand in Spain. They've got a gamified loyalty scheme, 24 million users.
Oh,
okay.
Wow.
And the platform Self-Driven, I mentioned in my talk, they have like an eBay-like equivalent in China they work with something like 1.5 million users. And that's about engaging them in the training content and also helping them hit their KPIs. So if you find the right platform, it will scale quite big. The biggest ones have mostly been in marketing first. But some of these learning and development and e-learning platforms and other things are now getting really robust.
Yeah.
The scale's great, by the way, because you can do so much split testing and gamification to fine-tune it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, because if you see in the other gaming world, it's kind of, it's huge now, right? I mean, there are marathons happening all over the world with so many people logged in at the same time. And I guess it's a matter of time, and especially multinational organizations which are spread all across, this is something that they can really use to try and see how they can engage employees across countries.
Well, we got another question. Well, it's the same person, slightly different question. What tools can we use? That's a really broad question, by the way, because it depends what you're trying to achieve. If you're just designing a game for a particular purpose, there are some very cheap ways to get started. There's programs like Game Maker, and there's a role play designer, I've just forgotten the name of, that costs less than $100 to get started on. Or you can even start using a big platform like Unity for free to test stuff out. Unity is quite good because at the click of a button, you can make it cross-platform and make a game work on Android and Apple and on the computer. Although it does take some people a while to get used to how to do it. But we have a secret resource in all our organizations, which is you will have a bunch of people working for you who really like playing games. And anyone who likes playing games has a natural affinity for gamification design. Yeah, because they know what works on them. They'll recognize a good game. So you should go and find them and include them in the next learning and development design process. Co-create with your employees that are actually going to be taking part. And they will make a better game and then spread the word about the game when you do launch it. That's like a top win. Also, some of them will probably already be designing games as a hobby. You know, the bigger your organization, the more likely there is someone who has the skills already.
Yeah. Well, those are the questions so far. Any other question? Oh, all right.
No, I'm just telling them. There's a good range of games you all play, by the way. From chess and Age of Empires.
Quite a numbers that came through in the beginning, right?
So if I was going to set you any homework, all of you, it would be to play more games and a wider variety of them. Okay? And then you will learn a lot more. Don't just stick to the ones you're used to.
Yeah. So I know you have a hard stop, Pete, in another 10 minutes. So
I could do with an extra couple of minutes because I'm delivering another workshop.
Yeah, I know. You can have one more cup of coffee in that cold weather over there.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for being with us today. And, I think, I'm sure everyone else found it very interesting. I did. I was really interesting to know some things. I mean, especially how flow is used in gamification. That was an insight for me. So really interesting. Thank you, and thank you for offering to share the presentation with us.
Yep.
We will surely share it with all the participants, and looking forward to having you sometime in India whenever we can all travel again.
Oh yeah, it'd be great to be back.
Thank you. Thanks, Pete.
Thanks everyone. Thanks for listening and engaging and putting your comments in the chat box. It really makes a difference. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.